songs that I don't put in the band. Because they're meant for oh, well, that's not. Yeah. So I can sign up for that.
They're meant for who?
I know basically I play electric guitar with the band, and a lot of songs I play on acoustic don't translate well. That's also the other thing I was going to suggest. You can force more on what's the space if you want to use switch to acoustic. Yeah. He also has an acoustic guitar, but his acoustic guitar is like one of the hardest to play because the strings are so high off the fretboard. I've played it, it hurts so much. You gotta. Yeah, really strong fingers. Okay. Well, you can borrow mine. Yeah. Clemson has a whatever you call that. Don't let microphone, right? Yeah, pick up. Oh, is it still pick up? Please.
All right. So today we're going to do some readings that go with book 11. Let's see. Friday we're going to do book 12. Also, on Friday, your peer review is due of another student's paper. You need to give them some feedback, and you need to give a copy to me. I guess I should provide an online interface for that, so I'll do that. You're expected to do at least 2 full pages of comments. And again, we are looking for philosophically substantial comments. We are not looking for grammatical comments. We are not looking for attaboys. Yeah, if you want to throw 1 or 2 of those in, just to make yourself feel like you're not, attacking somebody viciously, okay? But, that's not the heavy lifting.
Do you want the comments on a separate document or as like comments on like a Microsoft Word page? I with that. Because if it's 2 pages.
I mean, I prefer the separate document, but if you've already done it if it's substantially easier, you can do that, but just know it should be the equivalent of, 2 full double-spaced pages in a Word document.
I have like comments highlighted on his Word document, and then in the body of the email, I've just been taking notes of, general organizational things, so I can copy and paste that into the Word document.
Now, organizational comments can be very helpful.
Yeah.
Because oftentimes, how can I say this politely? I read a lot of undergraduate papers that instead of having an argumentative thesis on a specific point, instead they read like, here are 12 random disconnected tidbits on such and such a topic. And oftentimes, they just need to reorganize the information so that it connects to make a certain point. But that is a substantial quantum leap forward in the quality of your paper. And it doesn't actually require more research usually. It just requires thinking more smartly or focusedly about your content instead of just machine gunning random points on such and such a topic. So yeah, organizational points can be very helpful.
I'm writing a very, very similar paper where I just submitted it to someone for my 101 class, and the entire semester, everything you said for every class period has been, basically the whole paper just needs to be counter arguments. So I just have like free will defense counter argument, something in the Odyssey counter argument, eternity impediment counter argument, and I'm like, this doesn't flow at all. So like transition sentences, transition paragraphs.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times all you need is a clear introduction that says, this is my thesis, here are the main points I'm about to make and connect to the thesis, and some transition language. And again, that goes from, frankly, mediocre C+ paper to at least an A-. I mean, very frequently, it's that simple. And then you start talking about, okay, now you've got a real argument. Now let's look at venues to present it or publish it. By the way, is anyone doing Paideia? Did we miss Paideia?
I know nothing. I already know what is the thing.
It's an undergraduate research conference sponsored by the university.
I'm working on a lab for Paideia. they end up, they tend to submit videos,
Right.
to go. It's doing virtually.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's, you know, COVID screws everything up, but if anyone wants to turn their paper into something to be presented at a forum like Paideia, I'm happy to, support you in that. You know, so, just let me know. I mean, obviously, it's too late for this year, but, you know, in the future, if you're pursuing something you're particularly interested in. All right, I think those are the main points. Other than that, I just want to encourage you, don't lose track of the reading summaries. You know, there's 10 due by the end of the semester, and now there are 4 opportunities left after today. Want to encourage you, persevere to the end. Sound like a prophet of doom, the end is nigh. If you are looking, if you don't know what to do with your summer, I am teaching my philosophy of movies course in the June term, asynchronously online, so you can take it anywhere at any time during June.
You wanna change that to philosophy or religion in the movies course?
I cannot do that.
It's so close. Just change one word.
Why do you, is there a particular reason? Have you already taken the 326?
No, I just, let me put it this way, whenever I tell people my major, I just say religion. I didn't leave out the philosophy thing entirely.
So your interest is more the religion side rather than the philosophy side. Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's not a religion movies course. In the past, I have done, a movie or two that touches on religion. Les Miserables. I thought about doing Dogma. Signs, I do Signs. Have you seen the movie Signs with Mel Gibson? It's a fun M. Night Shyamalan version of dealing with the problem of evil. Yeah, Mel Gibson plays a former pastor whose wife died in a tragic accident, and now it's the verge of alien invasion. But really, let's tie those two things together. But really, the movie is about his crisis of faith. He's angry at God for what happened to his wife, and he feels in the middle of the alien invasion that this sort of thing could happen again. So that is a movie I've done regularly, and whatever its merits as a movie, it does make good fodder for discussion. If you were to take the class, I could guarantee that I can include that.
Well, I got a full-time job and I don't like writing, so.
All right, fair enough. I just wanted to extend the invitation. But still, you should see that movie sometime. You're going to take it.
I haven't saved on tab now.
What's the rating for it? I'm very curious.
Rotten Tomatoes gives it a 74%.
That's actually better than I would have expected. I mean, I think of it as one of his sort of mid-range movies. I mean, it's not The Sixth Sense. It's not Unbreakable, but it's also not The Hack. What's the other one that people really hate? Oh, it's not The Lady in the Water. It's not a mermaid. Or The Avatar. It's not one of those people hate it. But 74% is better than I would have thought. I would have thought maybe in the 60s. I mean, I like it, but once you understand M. Night Shyamalan's sort of formula, it's less effective each time. All right, enough about that. So let's talk about our extra readings. I started with 2 readings on the authority of Scripture and on the assembly of the canon, to which Augustine was a near contemporary. So this is a recent church history by Eusebius, and I got some from Irenaeus. I guess I should start by inviting comments, thoughts, questions, observations. What'd you see? What'd you think?
I didn't know that Mark wrote under Peter.
Oh, yes, yes.
That was completely new. Whenever I think of Mark, I'm just like the original gospel kind of thinking about the synoptics, and then it's like there was someone before Mark. No.
So the Gospel of Mark's authority largely stems from his close association with Peter. If you read closely, I don't think Mark was a first-hand eyewitness to the events he offers an account of in the Gospel. One fun thing, supposedly, and I don't remember where this is recorded, but supposedly when Mark showed Peter the Gospel of Mark, Peter's response was that he neither vigorously approved of it nor did he forbid it. So it's just one of those great, meh, whatever. Mark, what you been doing these days? Well, Gospel of Mark. Well, gee, nice to be given so much credit for something that you weren't even there for. Yeah, I guess so. It happened, something like that. Although, wait, there are people that think that Mark was present at the later events. I think it's in the Gospel of Mark, where there's a story, there's just a quick mention on the Garden of Gethsemane story, when they come to arrest Jesus, there's a young man who flees completely naked. And because of the way that person is described, many people think it's an autobiographical reference of Mark to himself, by Mark to referring to himself. Sort of like the Alfred Hitchcock, you have to place yourself in the story somewhere. And Night Shyamalan, he's another one who loves to do that. So yeah, all right. So Gospel of Mark. Other thoughts and reactions.
I thought the stuff with Ptolemy was pretty interesting.
Yeah, the Ptolemy. Now, as you may know, the Earth-centered account of astronomy goes back, the one that was disproved by Copernicus and Galileo. It goes back to Aristotle with improvements made by Ptolemy. And I'm pretty sure that this Ptolemy, there were more than one Ptolemies historically, but I'm pretty sure this was the Ptolemy in question.
Yeah, the first one was way a couple hundred years ago. Still.
Right. This is the era when the improvements were made. So this should be the Ptolemy in question.
I thought it was interesting just the part where he's kind of trying to compile the actual correct translations and how he's I don't trust these guys to have their own personal biases, so he has them always do it separately.
Mm.
And I just kind of thought that almost lined up with some of the weird old experiments that we used to do. They're trying to find the original languages, the original versions of stuff.
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, for example, did it say, what did it say? It said one of the Gospels, was it Mark? It was supposedly first written in Hebrew and circulated amongst the Jewish believers. I mean, it claims that in section, I don't know, that's not, section 5 is about the book of Hebrews, not about the Gospel that was intended for the Hebrews. It's on page 2, points to Matthew published his Gospel among the Hebrews in their own language. We don't have any manuscripts in Hebrew, so we don't know that to be true. I don't think that's currently the favored view, but I mean, there would be a way to test it. I think you would look to see if the if the Old Testament translations look like they were translated directly out of Hebrew rather than from the Septuagint or something like that. That's the sort of thing you would do to try to determine whether Matthew was originally written in Hebrew or Greek.
I was gonna ask, where did they come from, and what happened to the rejected writings?
Yeah. The rejected writings are a real potpourri, to be blunt. The one that is most interesting to me is something called the Shepherd of Hermes. It's mentioned in point 4 on the first page. The Shepherd of Hermes was accepted by some of the regional level churches as part of the canon. If there was one book that I thought there was a case for making a 67th book in the canon, it would be The Shepherd of Hermes. But it's a little weird, and it's author. I mean, it's not. It's more like it reads like one of the Old Testament prophets, so it's a little different in feel than most of the New Testament stuff, other than the Book of Revelation. And it doesn't appear to have been written by a contemporary of Christ, like the others. So I think that's the reason it's excluded. But yeah, if there was a reason to include it, if there was one to be included, it'd be that one. Where did the other ones come from? Christ, like many great figures, that they inspire. Either, if you want to be cynical, you call them copycats, who seek to sort of get authority, get legitimacy from their association with the famous authoritative name. So groups like the Manichaeans that's how I would interpret them. But if you want to be a little more generous, you could just say it inspires kind of a fan fiction. People want more stories, and maybe there are, secondhand rumors people hear, and they want to collect more accounts for people to consider. So it all depends on what you like. So for example, now this isn't an apocryphal story, but I really enjoyed the movie The Young Messiah, which was written by that woman who did all the vampire stories 10 or 20 years ago. And we have almost no information on the nature of Christ between infancy and the age of 30. What kind of child would he have been? And I think that's a wonderful topic for speculation, so long as you admit we're speculating here. So I thought that was a very fun story. It wasn't Stephanie Meyer, it was somebody better.
I think there was it's more like a medieval book where it's like a pseudo.
Yeah.
Some people, I forget what it's called. It was like back in his youth. People were like, wait, no, this doesn't really line up for any evidence or anything like that.
Well, you got to be careful. There's pseudo all sorts of people. In one article, I was fooled for over a month by a pseudo Augustine text. As I mentioned, Augustine wrote 100 things, so it's easy to say, oh, this must be one of the 70 I haven't really looked at closely. And just before publication, I looked at it a little more closely, and I realized this was not likely a genuine Augustinian authorship. So that would have been embarrassing. Again, the number of people who would have figured out what happened are very small. They would have been important, smart people that I care about. So most of the apocryphal books, the one that's probably most popular today is the Gospel of Timothy? Thomas, the Gospel of Thomas. And there's weird stuff in there. Like one of the interactions was Mary wants to join the apostles. And supposedly Peter says, well, she can, but only if she first becomes a man, for women are not fit to live. It's like, dude, that's not, I'm not saying that the apostles were egalitarians according to 21st century standards, but I don't think they went around saying such blatantly misogynistic things, especially about Christ's mom. And again, a lot of them have a lot more like Old Testament style visions and type of things in them, much less discursive teachings and narratives.
I think it was the Gospel of Thomas that we spoke about in the New Testament class last semester. It was basically used to create almost a Gnostic North African religion that was just Christianity, but not.
Right. Another one that's not actually discussed here, but that is closely associated with the apostles is called the Didache. And it supposedly is the sort of customs of the apostles. But it's not really up for authoritative discussion here. Yeah. One thing that I think is interesting and important to realize is there wasn't a universal consensus on what went into the New Testament. You can see in point 3 that there are several books that are considered canon that were actually moderately controversial when they considered when they assembled the canon. James, Jude, 2nd Epistle of Peter, 2nd and 3rd John. One of the reasons is because so few of the church fathers quoted from these books. Frankly, in part, it's because these books are just so short. And if you've ever read these things, they're mostly pretty short. 2nd, 3rd John, Jude, they're all like less than a page. James, of course, was always a little controversial because it seems to run counter to the Pauline account of salvation. Even Martin Luther seemed to take a few real cheap shots at it, although he didn't really think it should be thrown out of the canon, despite the fact that he had a bad day and was called it the straw epistle. Mainly because somebody wanted to execute him, because he was resisting the interpretation pushed by James. What's that?
The apocryphal books.
Yes. Well, the apocryphal books too have always been, the exact status of them has always been a little bit wonky. But yeah, I mean, the Protestant Bible just doesn't include them. Whereas the older Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, and the Catholic tradition view them as maybe not co-equal with the 66 books, but of some weight and authority, not just something that's useful and sort of mostly true. See what else in these first two should we mention?
So you said the book The Shepherd, so this is just referred to as just the Shepherd, but you said the full name was the Shepherd.
Sometimes it's called the Shepherd of Hermes. Sometimes it's just called the Shepherd.
Is that like referring to each person, or is that referring to the Greek god? Is a weird kind of.
No. I'm pretty sure it refers to either an author or character in it, not Hermes the god.
Okay.
But if you're born in a Greek culture, a lot of the names are going to go back to Greek mythology. That's all that is, as far as I know. There is some fun commentary and speculation about the book of Hebrews. It's on page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The Epistle to the Hebrews, where is this Irenaeus? No, this is Eusebius. Where Eusebius is discussing, speculating about the author of the book of Hebrews. As you might know, it's one of the books that there's considerable dispute on who the actual author is. Now, the obvious person to suggest it is Paul, but Paul, in every other place that's associated with him, mentions himself by name in the letter as author. So it would be very odd if for him not to mention himself in Hebrews.
The beginnings of scrolls do get worn faster.
Well, that's right. I mean, maybe it just got worn off too quickly. But Hebrews does seem to have some content, enough content that doesn't appear in the other Pauline letters to make you think that, pretty good chance it's not Paul. But then if it's not Paul, who? And nobody knows. As point 14 says, but who wrote the epistle in truth? God knows. The statement of some who have gone before us is that Clement, bishop of the Romans, wrote the epistle. Of others, that Luke, the author of the Gospel and Acts, wrote it. But let this suffice on these matters. I don't think either of those theories are popular today. I also like the discussion of point 11. The verbal style of the epistle entitled to the Hebrews is not rude like the language of the apostle, who acknowledged himself rude in speech. That is an expression, but that its diction is pure Greek. Anyone who has the power to discern differences in phraseology will acknowledge. Okay. All right, anything else on the first two readings on the assembly of the canon, which is referenced in book 11 of,
Point 12, it says, the thoughts of the epistle are admirable, not inferior. Is that just like an old way of saying like equivalent?
That's about Hebrews, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think his point is, it's well argued, it seems orthodox based on what we know of everything else, it seems to fit in well. So yeah, was that in him considering that that Paul may have been the author? I lost my spot. Turn my page.
That is line is problematic.
Yeah, there it is. So yeah, he's saying that he's basically making the point. No matter who wrote it, it seems authoritative. It seems right. It seems sort of worthy of inclusion. There are some very interesting arguments in Hebrews that try to make the point that Christ is superior to Moses, Christ is superior to the angels, and the arguments are unique within the New Testament. So they're higher quality. All right, well, let's look at the Bible passage I included. I included Genesis chapter 1, in part because this is referenced in book 11, because we are talking about the creation of time specifically. And in the next book, we will discuss the relation of form and matter and how supposedly God forms out of formlessness. So in verse 1 and 2, it says the earth was formless and void or empty. And this will become a very important phrase in book 12, where using the Greek categories of form and matter, Augustine is going to speculate on the proper interpretation of how creation occurred. No big deal. Just describing the foundations. Thoughts, comments on Genesis chapter 1? I assume you're all familiar.
I'll say it for my student discussion.
You can say it for your student discussion, that's fine. All right, let's talk about Plato's Timaeus. Now here, let me show you one of the most popular medieval pieces of art. And it has very much to do with what we are discussing today. Let's see, what's the biggest one I can get? No, that's not bad. All right, so here, two different images, or two related images. Here is Raphael's The School at Athens, which supposedly has up to 50 Greco-Roman figures in it. But the most central two are these two. And the one on the right is the one in the red is Plato. The one in the blue, of course, is Aristotle. And their postures represent something symbolic of each of their philosophies. Plato points up towards the immaterial world where the forms are thought to exist, while Aristotle places gestures with the palm of his hand downward, emphasizing his empirical emphasis, his earthly emphasis. All right, so what does this have to do with the Timaeus? The favorite book of Plato in the medieval era is the Timaeus. In fact, for most of the earlier medieval era, roughly between the 4th century and the 12th century, it was the only book written by Plato that had been translated into the Latin. And if you look super closely at this, the name on this book here that Plato is carrying, it is Plato's Timaeus. It's the Christian's favorite book. It's the theist's favorite book from Plato. Anyone want to guess why? No, that's not why.
It does reference the father and I mentioned that by summary.
It not just mentions a figure that looks very much like God, but goes even farther, and it gives a whole creation story that sounds extraordinarily similar to the Judeo-Christian Muslim creation story, where the origins of this world are God, a good God for good reasons with good intent, creating the current world. Now, there are some important differences. In Christian theology, God creates ex nihilo, out of nothing. In the Platonic creation story, God creates from previously existing elements of fire, water, air, earth, but he gives structure to them that had not previously been there.
So he also gives form to the.
Yes, so he's adding form to them, but in the Christian story, it's these elements aren't pre-existing. All right, while we've got the photo up, anyone want to guess what book Aristotle is holding?
I was going to ask a question about the Timaeus. Would they, the translators at the time kind of tweaked Timaeus to kind of fit the worldview that time for them?
That's a good question. Honestly, I haven't read it closely enough in the Greek version and the Latin version to know, but it makes sense that surely in some of the nuances, when there's probably more fluidity to translation than most people realize. So it would be very natural for people to sort of fill in some of the gray blanks with something a little more direct, a little more Christian sounding than might be fully warranted. That seems well within, that seems likely. All right, well, let me just mention Aristotle is holding a very different book. If you look closely, it's the Ethics. So he's holding a copy of the Nicomachean Ethics, which is very important to latter medieval philosophy. So people like Aquinas use sort of the parts of the Summa Theological are sort of modeled on the structure of the Nicomachean Ethics. So those two books those two ancient books, the Timaeus and the Nicomachean Ethics, are very important for understanding medieval thoughts from Augustine to Aquinas. And frankly, continues to shape more conservative forms of Christianity to this day. I've not found a great explanation for it. The best story I've heard is that it's a proper name, that it's like meant for someone or inspired by someone. So it's for Nikolai, basically, either advice to Nikolai or sort of a tribute to Nikolai. I'm not sure which. So thoughts, comments on that Timaeus?
I like, right, it was interesting the part where he said the head is shaped like a sphere in relation to the universe.
Yes. Which page is that on?
Oh, I had it.
That's just one. Yeah. So when I teach 201, I always do several readings from Plato, and I don't do this one. But often the question comes up, You know, what do Plato and Socrates really believe about religious stuff? Because sometimes they speak as if they believe, or at least mostly believe, the Homeric polytheistic stories. There's several times he cites them as sort of premises in his arguments or as analogous examples for what he intends. There's also times where he just seems outrightly skeptical. For example, in the Republic, he argues that certain elements in Homer and Hesiod should just be censored, and including parts depicting the gods in certain ways, which is not something a good Greek Homeric polytheist is going to suggest. Now, I'll say I'm really sympathetic to his points there, where he says, yeah, well, Homer thought Zeus was this hormone-enraged, promiscuous jerk. Obviously, we can't have people depicting the gods like that, because, you know, if we depict the gods that way, then every philandering man in Athens now has an apologetic for his unfaithfulness to his marriage. I mean, if even Zeus can't confine himself to one woman, what chance do we mere men have? But still, the idea that one should censor your religious stories based on sort of your moral sensibilities, it seems backwards if somebody is a full-fledged adherent to that view. So sometimes he sounds like a skeptic. Sometimes he sounds like he's sort of a conventional Greek polytheist that, you know, has a much more philosophically rich view. But in a few places, especially the Timaeus, he sounds an awful lot like a monotheist. And there you have it, which of course why this is the Christian's favorite book of Plato and the Euphrocrates.
And it's about halfway down page 14.
All right, so page 14. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Bottom paragraph? 3. First then the gods. First then the gods, imitating the spherical shape of the universe, enclosed the 2 divine courses in a spherical body. That, namely, which we now term the head, being the most divine part of us, right, because that's where the soul is, because that's where consciousness is centered. And the Lord of us all, that is in us. To this the gods, when they put together the body, gave all the other members to be servants, considering that it partook in every sort of motion, in order that it might not tumble about among the high and deep places of the earth, but might be able to get over the one and out of the other. They provided the body to be its vehicle and means of locomotion, which consequently had length and was furnished with 4 limbs extended and flexible. Wow, right on the sentence. These gods, still going, these gods contrived to be the instruments of locomotion with which it might take hold and find support, and so be able to pass through all places, carrying on high the dwelling place of the most sacred and divine part of us. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, that's fine.
Like, so it might not tumble along the high deep places of the earth. It's rolling around.
Indeed. In one of the myths in the Symposium, the original human shape was spherical, and it moves by means of like rolling about, pressed by limbs. You know, your feet push off so that you roll.
I suppose the explanation of why we walk forwards instead of backwards is silly.
Indeed. Yeah, a lot of it just seems sort of strangely ad hoc and speculative. And I mean, and here's another good example. It goes back and forth from sounding like he believes in a single creator God, and then what is this on page like? He has this section where he talks about Oceanus and Tethys were the children of heaven and earth, and from these sprang Phares, Cronos, and Rhea, and all that generation. And from Cronos and Rhea sprang Zeus and Hera, and all those said to be their brethren, and others who were the children of these. So yeah, he just goes back and forth between sounding like a Greek polytheist and then sounding like something more like a monotheist.
When it comes to like the stuff that he's talking about, the sphere and why we walk forwards and backwards, is he being serious all the time, or is he sometimes just like goofing? Like
it's sometimes hard to tell. I take a lot of the stuff in the Timaeus straightforward, whereas I take a lot of stuff from the Symposium to be satirical and some of the stuff in the Republic. Dr. Jelinek is our ancient expert, so she might have a more intelligent opinion than I do on this. But as far as I can tell, things connected to geometry have a very important significance in the mind of the ancient Greeks, including that of Plato. So it certainly sounds like something a sort of Pythagorean-inspired Greek philosopher might think. But the problem with Plato is he's sarcastic often enough. It's worth asking, has he now crossed the line? Is he now making fun of that mode of thought? I think more often than not he's serious about it, but I'm not sure. That's the problem with being sarcastic, is if you do it often enough, if you do it well enough, people have a hard time telling. Someone once asked me whether I was being sarcastic in a comment I made, and I had to think really hard about it. And if I was completely honest with her, I wasn't sure. But I take most of the Timaeus as not satire. All right, finally, if we get to the Plotinus, we have a lot here on eternality and time, and the model of eternality and time, and the account of eternality that is given here. In Plotinus, surprise, surprise, is going to end up sounding a lot like the account of divine eternality that Augustine and the other medievals attribute to God. Which is not to say that the view is false, but it's to say that it is a view that, if it works, it is noted to have worked for other sort of ideas on the relation between creation and that from which creation emanates. So if you look on the 5th or 6th Plotinus page, the creator being outside of time precedes the universal only as its cause. So again, God the creator is outside the time, just as use the Platonic intellectual principle exists in an eternal state outside of time. Always must therefore be applied to the power, the nous, the intellectual power, which contains no interval in its existence, which has need of nothing outside of what it possesses, because God is full of itself and fully sufficient in himself. Because it possesses everything, because it is every being and thus lacks nothing. Such nature could not be complete in one respect, but incomplete in another. Even if what is in time should appear complete, as a body that suffices, the soul appears complete, though it be complete only for the soul. That which is in time needs the future, and consequently is incomplete in respect to the time it stands in need of. When it succeeds in joining the time to which it aspires, and succeeds in becoming united thereto, even though it still remains perfect, it still is called perfect by Robert's way. All right, so things in time are not complete and therefore not perfect because they still have more yet to experience. There we go. If you skip down a few more lines, Otherwise, as its life would be divided, it would itself cease to be absolutely indivisible. But existence must be as indivisible in its life as in its nature, being. The Creator was good. Does indeed refer to, which I believe is from Chinese. Creator was good. Does indeed refer to the notion of the universe and indicates that in the principle superior to the universe, nothing began to exist at any particular time. Never, therefore, did the universe begin to exist in time, because though its author existed before it, it was only in the sense that its author was the cause of its existence. So there's like a logical causal relation, but not a temporal causal relation between the God figure and the creation image in Plotinus. But after having used the word was to express this thought, Plato immediately corrects himself, and he demonstrates that this word does not apply to the things that possess eternity. Because nothing is a was, nothing is past tense for them, because everything is in the present, in the eternal present. Everything is eternally present to a divine being outside of time that in eternity experiences all things at once. It is only maybe an explanation for us that we would discuss things in terms of a was or a sequence. So all that to say, Augustine's not the one who comes up with the idea of eternality. He seems to be inheriting it and revising it from Plotinus. There's a bunch more stuff here about time and movement. Point 12 has time as measured by movement, and in that sense it is the measure of movement, but it is not, the movement of things is not time itself. A very similar point to that made by Augustine in book 11. That's all I feel we need to point out. Questions, thoughts, observations? We've got 150 seconds left or so. Let's use them well.
I met someone that introductory conversation we had was whether or not Aristotle existed. He argued that he was only a character in all of Plato's works, and I was like, okay, but, and then talked to him again. What do you have to say about that?
I don't remember Aristotle making an appearance in Plato's works. Or
yes, no, Socrates.
or whether Socrates ever existed. So was Socrates only a character in Plato's works? I forget whether we have. Well, I guess there's two problems with that. First of all, Socrates appears as a character in writings by two other people, Xenophon and Aristophanes. So there are two other people that write about Socrates. I mean, I wouldn't say it's completely impossible, but it seems pretty unlikely. That we'd have three authors writing about the non-existent Socrates of sort of verifiable real authors from that era. But that's the danger. That's why it's important to write things yourself, because then other people could just argue that you're just somebody else's character.
So that was a good historian too, right?
I mean, that's one way of understanding him. I understand him as sort of another follower of Plato. Another follower of Plato, Socrates. But his account of the Apology is better, I am told, in that Socrates actually gives well-developed arguments for his innocence. I don't take that view very seriously. But, this is the problem with the skeptical view. I mean, you can prior to sort of modern printing press era type books in the early Renaissance era, the fragments that we have to work off are such that you can always question the existence of anything. But that seems silly.
I agree.
Very good, thank you, good questions. See you next time.